I'm J.G. Michael, and this is Parallax Views. Hey there, Parallax Views listeners. On this edition of the program, we continue our series on the Iran war. Our last episode was with Richard Silverstein of the Tikkun Olam blog, and on this edition of the program, we'll be hearing from Ori Goldberg, Israeli dissident and former scholar, a Middle East analyst, and a close friend of the show at this point. I consider him a friend. And this is in our continuing series that I'm calling The View from Israel. Ori Goldberg gives his take as an Israeli on the events we see unfolding, and I hope you'll find it fascinating. Before we get to the conversation, I'd like to remind you that this show is almost entirely listener-funded, with the exception of my one sponsor, the mighty Mike Swanson of WallStreetWindow.com. So if you can, please consider supporting me on Patreon at patreon.com/parallaxviews. One more time, that's patreon.com/parallaxviews. And of course, head on over to WallStreetWindow.com for all your financial and trading news needs. I've had listeners make a return on investment thanks to Mike's trading tips. So head on over to Mike Swanson's WallStreetWindow.com and sign up for his newsletter now. I believe if you do that, you can also get a free copy of Mike's ebook, The Twofold Formula, the single best trading pattern I've ever used. Again, Mike's work is highly recommended. I've had listeners, again, make a return on investment from his trading tips, so his newsletter is worthwhile, and that ebook is an added bonus. So, WallStreetWindow.com, and with that being said, let's get right to it with Ori Goldberg. Welcome back to Parallax Views. Not just one of my favorite guests, but I would also, I hope this is okay, call him a friend at this point. I'm talking to, I would call him an Israeli dissident and a commentator on issues related to the Middle East. Ori Goldberg, how are you doing?
First of all, thank you. The feeling's very mutual. I'm doing, I think, the polite answer in times like these is as well as can be expected. It is not a good time to be an Israeli. It's not a good time to live in Israel. There are a lot of very particular hassles for the kind of war that we're having with Iran. One of them was, I think during the first 24 hours, we were ordered to shelter anywhere from 15 to 20 times. I lost count at some point. Now it's less frequent, but still very much of a hassle. Country is not shut down, but nobody is, fully engaged with their civilian work, although it's less drastic than it was in June. So things are complicated and as well as can be expected.
So in terms of what has transpired over the past week, what are your initial thoughts on the U.S.-Israel joint attack? This Operation Epic Fury, I think, is what our Pentagon chief, Pete Hegseth, is calling it. I think this was all avoidable, personally.
It was all of that is almost axiomatic. That it was all avoidable. I mean, there was absolutely nothing preventive about it. I don't think it has been planned for months, or rather, I'll put it differently. Every military or national security organization has usually a very extensive planning branch. And the dudes who have executive roles in the planning branch, that's what they do. They make plans for everything, for every contingency. So plans were in place, targets were identified, various schematics were drawn up on how to make the Islamic Republic crumble by killing this guy or that guy or bombing this installation or that installation. So that was not a problem. Moving American forces to the Middle East is cumbersome and labor intensive, but it's also not much of a problem. That's what militaries do. They deploy, and they are set to deploy, and there are protocols in place. That does not mean that the United States necessarily thought it was headed for a war. I actually think Trump was in a deal-making mood, but then the Israeli pressure got to him, not in a principled sense, but because what is the bits and pieces of information that are emerging seem to imply that there was an extraordinary meeting of the most senior Iranian leadership officials in one place, and that Israel became aware of this and told Trump that this was a now or never chance, sort of like the assassination of General Qasem Soleimani a while back, which was also, again, a one-time thing. And it was because this was carried out, and it was carried out the Israeli way with massive, massive, massive bombing, and ended up with the death of the supreme leader, that this turned into a full-fledged war. Every sign I'm seeing from the American side is that even in the Trump administration, people are not interested in a prolonged war. They are very quickly and blatantly walking away from declarations of regime change. And there's a lot of space, there's a lot of light showing between the narrative that's being spun by Israel and the narrative that's coming out of Washington, D.C.
It's interesting. I was speaking earlier to James Dorsey, another scholar of the Middle East, and while he said he thinks there is an Israeli influence that led to this, he thinks there's also a confluence of other factors.
Sure.
U.S. Pentagon types. I mean, there's always been bad blood between Iran and the U.S. State, the
Yeah.
national security state, but I don't know. I kind of think there's more to say our mutual friend John Hoffman's view than a lot of people want to admit, because it does feel like it is not really in the U.S. interest to do this. That's what I can't make sense of.
I'll see you and raise you. Even if you could come up with a very savantish national security definition or explanation of why it is in U.S. interests to do this, it is very clearly, very overtly not in Trump's political interest to do this. This is not a popular war by any means, and certainly not just from the left. If anything, um, the spirits of rebellion seem to be, beginning to grumble on the right. If you have somebody like Bill Cassidy, senator, he's from Pennsylvania or from Tennessee, I forget. I always get it mixed up. Whatever, you know who I'm talking about, the
Yes, yeah.
physician. Yeah. So he tweeted, uh, "I'm presuming President Trump started this war because he was impressed that there was a clear national emergency and not simply because he disregarded the approval he constitutionally requires from Congress." In the current GOP, them's fighting words. You don't presume so blatantly anything unless you want to imply that that was not the case. So if you get your very solid GOP mainstream types like Bill Cassidy, who is, I think, generally considered a voice for moderation in the current party.
Yeah, I think
Trump,
he's Louisiana, by the way.
Louisiana, you're right.
Yes.
That's right. Because for me, Louisiana is wholly the Louisiana Senate delegation is wholly colored by Senator John Kennedy and his very particular type of roadshow. Uh, the guy who likes to pretend he's a judge in 19 in the a renewal of To Kill a Mockingbird, but is actually a Rhodes Scholar, was at Oxford, does not speak with a Delta accent unless he's on camera. So you're right, Bill Cassidy is from Louisiana. So that means that people are not buying it in the GOP either, and they're of course they're willing to give Trump some leeway, but I think even Trump understands that is not the case. And Trump needed a distraction. For a while. It was the aliens, and then there was this. Uh, of course, there is Israeli influence, but think of it as like the degenerate types that hang around a betting parlor, who will come up to you and tell you that they have a sure bet because they have a man on the inside, and he says that this or that horse is going down in the fifth. okay, or a rigged fight. That's the way the Israelis would sell this, not out of some kind of ideological alliance or bond, or just on the premise of rapid, ensured success. And I think you can see Trump succumbing to the urge to gamble on that, especially when he is so desperate for a break right now because he's doing so poorly, and is even getting the GOP stalwarts angry. So I think that's what happened. That's what makes sense to me. That was good for Israel because, and I'm going off on my own rant here, so stop me whenever. It's good for Israel because for Israel, this war with Iran is not unlike Israel's genocidal campaign in Gaza, in the sense that, and you and I have talked about this, there is no end game except for the disappearance of the Palestinians, which doesn't necessarily mean kill everyone, but either make them so completely subservient that they never pipe up again, or just simply make them go away. Some will die, some will immigrate, some will be ethnically cleansed, whatever. There is no end game. There's only a present continuous of mayhem and destruction. And you can see this. It was, I think, apparent right from the start. It is now quite stark. The U.S. is setting up timeframes. Trump is saying this will take 4 weeks or less. Secretary Hegseth is saying this is not a never-ending war like Iraq. This war will end.
Yeah, I think he also said it's not a regime change war.
Yeah, very directly. And Trump set, I understand, 4 goals at a speech he gave that had to do with missiles and destroying Iran's navy and the nuclear program, and maybe something about the proxies, but absolutely no regime change. Whereas in Israel, the party line that's being sold and happily accepted by Israelis of all political colors is that we're doing this to ensure our security, but of course we're also doing this to help the brave Iranian people. And hackers hacked into Iranian National Broadcasting Corporation's transmission and broadcast Netanyahu speaking in Persian. Of course, he was dubbed, and all that is spoken of as a great success here. But obviously, Israel doesn't give a fig about the liberation of the Iranian people. And while Israel has a gazillion targets it can bomb, so it can build any story based on the bombing of these targets, it's also becoming quite clear that once again, Israel doesn't really know what to do now.
You
It
know,
has,
mhm.
yeah, go ahead. No, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say it's interesting because I've seen the images from Tel Aviv, just cars on fire, and just, I mean, because Iran struck
Yep.
Tel Aviv, and it was interesting. There's very prominent liberal Zionist historian who is responding to this. I won't name her, but I think she's done some interesting work in her specific areas, but we don't agree on anything. But she was going on about, and this is why we need to destroy Iran once and for all, so this never happens again. And I think what gets left out of that is the fact that it was the U.S. and Israel that preemptively started this.
Yeah. I did, and
And this voice that I'm talking about, this person is not they're not like a Netanyahu person
no,
with
no,
a
no,
C.
no, 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 no. It right now it is the liberals who are leading the rhetorical war effort. And Netanyahu doesn't have to say anything. In that sense, Netanyahu is cool as a cucumber. He doesn't have to go overboard now. He can let his opposition, which officially canceled itself out. Yair Lapid, the head of the opposition, said now there's no opposition and there's no coalition. We're all united. So he's just letting them get all fired up in support of what he's doing. And then when there's a national election here, he will say, why not vote for me? These people support me anyway. Okay. And here's the thing. The logic is so obvious and so simple and so intuitive that when you're bombarded constantly by the endless chatter of the propaganda machine, you start, you're being gaslit. You start to think you're saying to yourself, I'm just, a regular person. They know all these secrets. They've got all this intelligence. Maybe they're right. Maybe Iran really has been threatening to destroy Israel for 50 years almost, and it's high time we got up and did something about it, and we're fully justified in doing something about it. And you kind of lose sight of the very, very obvious thing that you just said. We started. We started it. We started an illegal war of aggression against a sovereign country. I can say a host of bad things about the Islamic Republic. That means nothing in this context. Israel and the United States unilaterally declared war on Iran, violated its sovereignty in the most flagrant way possible, and are now attacking not just its military installations, but its civilians as well. But it sort of seems trite to say it. Certainly in Israel, you sound petty when you insist that that's the case. People are like, come on. I mean, you know the truth. You know that any war we might have with Iran is justified because they've been after us forever and they won't rest until we've all been slaughtered. So you get.
Is there a sense at times? I've talked with other. I talked with Shaul McGee about this at one point, but
Mhm.
I don't think every Israeli or every American Jewish Zionist is necessarily a Kahanist. But I remember Shaul said to me once that a lot of Zionists have a little bit of Kahana in them, in the sense of, there's always this sense that maybe Kahana was right and everyone's out to get us and we have to do something now. Is there a sort of psychology there?
Yeah, it's definitely true. And you and I have talked about this over the last 2 years. Um, it's not, I mean, it kind of warps the state of affairs when you insist on categories like Zionist and Kahanist, okay? The notion that Israeli normalcy, Israeli Jewish normalcy, is linked to the preservation at all costs of Jewish supremacy and to the evaluation of Jewish life as more valuable than any other life is a very, very basic foundation of Zionism in all of its manifestations. And you ask most Israelis, and they will tell you, and they will be irate if you suggest that they're being racist or hateful. They will tell you that that's just it. I mean, we only have the one state, and they have who knows how many countries they can go to. And this is all, I mean, being critical of Israel at this moment is akin to suggesting that Jews do not deserve uh, self-determination as a nation and do not deserve a state. That's what they'll all say to you because we've all grown up, we've all, gotten this with our mother's milk. That this is just the way it is. It's so obvious that if you actually bring it up in these terms, there are some people who will, or quite a few people who will now say, yes, that's right. They'll get all Stephen Miller about it. History is made by the powerful, and you take what you want, and there is no international law, and we have to act. But there are a lot of Israelis who would be against at the suggestion that they were racist. So yeah, they're very much so. It's Zionism is imbued with, at the very, very least, a highly politicized form of Jewish exceptionalism. I think it's Jewish supremacy, but I would settle for Jewish exceptionalism. We are not like anybody else. The world owes us, we deserve this, and it's not just our right to do whatever we feel we need to guard this, it's our prerogative. We owe this to the 6 million. We owe this to the Jews of the future. And you see a lot of op-eds in the Hebrew press certainly over the last few days, with headlines like, I just glanced at one earlier today, with headlines that say something like, Israeli Jews have stopped blinking. Okay, we are now clear-headed. We're not, ducking our historical responsibility.
This is just in the past few days.
Yeah. Well, this has been
I was gonna say, because you say in the past few days, and I was gonna comment, it's almost like a repeat, I guess, of the headlines that would have been coming out of Israel after October 7th.
absolutely, but now we have October 7th was all colored up with um actual, trauma and fear and revenge and a lot of very volatile emotions and motivations that sort of bled into each other. This whole war with Iran is, even though Israel is taking missiles and life here is quite unlivable, um, this war with Iran is also remote. We we've now earned the right to employ a more metaphysical perspective. Okay, so October 7th really was about we have to stay alive and they're all out to destroy us and they're here and we have to stop them. The Iranians are far away. So this has grown, and over the last few days, Israelis who were emboldened by what they thought Israel should do after October 7th, by the sense of, you know, righteous verification, are now both prophets and human rights activists, right? We're doing this to liberate the Iranian people. And they all want us to do this. Okay? They're eager to have us bomb their country to shreds.
I want to pick up on something you said a few minutes ago, just because
Mhm.
I know I'm going to have listeners that wonder about it. Um, this issue you mentioned of Jewish exceptionalism or Jewish supremacy. Here in the US, I know a lot of people that are critical of Israel are increasingly concerned about using that terminology just because of the sort of Candace Owens types and the I mean, I guess the fear of real anti-Semitism with these Nick Fuentes type people. What would you say to those people? Because I think you are onto something, but in the US, people are very afraid of real anti-Semitism and legitimate anti-Semitism, not like a weaponized form of it. So I don't know how we can thread that needle, I guess.
You're right. That's a real challenge. And I have to say that when I came to my senses after October 7th, I was very vitriolic, in not respecting the actual anti-Semitism that is very much there. And I have adopted, my perspective on this has broadened a bit. And you're right that this is a real challenge. And just like the potential of regime change within Iran has to come from the Iranian people, this needs to come from Jews. The ability to differentiate between being Jewish and being Israeli is one thing. But at a much deeper level, it's about a question of whether being Jewish carries a particular cultural or religious or ethical imperative, or it doesn't. Yeah, and that might be the biggest divide between Israeli Jews and Jews who live outside Israel. I don't like to use the word diaspora because it assumes way too much. Um, I don't remember if I shared this very, very old joke with you about two Israeli businessmen who immigrate to Los Angeles, and after they have kids and settle down, they start going to a Reform synagogue. And after about 3 Saturdays that they go and they hear the sermon from the rabbi, they come out and one of them says to the other, listen, that was great. I don't get why we couldn't be Jewish like that when we were in Israel. It's great. It's smart, sensible people talking about humanistic values. And the other businessman says, yes, but there was just one thing I didn't understand. Maybe my English is not good enough. What's Hebrew for tikkun olam, which is the Reformed Jewish creed? And it is, of course, in Hebrew, and it means amending the world, making the world right, proper, just. Okay, so he heard Tikkun Olam at the Reform Shul. He thought that was English. So A great majority of Israeli Jews think that the highest achievement Jews have managed to land is normalcy. We're just like everybody else. Of course, we're not, because the world owes us and we're victims, and Israel is entitled to do anything it wants. But, uh, we're normal. We've got all kinds of Jews here, and being Jewish doesn't necessarily mean anything but belonging to the tribe. Jewish communities in the United States, certainly, but in other places as well, always a minority, always very conscientious of their ethics and their cultural work and contributions to the general public, but also to themselves. And they very much are concerned with what it means to be Jewish, other than just being Jewish. And the ability to be Jewish in that way, it needs to be reinforced and it needs to be asserted, and it isn't. A lot of Jews in the United States and all over the world succumb to the temptation of defining themselves wholly in Israeli terms, and substituting cause for effect. Israel is being targeted. Israel and we are being targeted because of anti-Semitism, not hatred for Israel and the fact that Israel has worked hard to make Jewishness synonymous with Israeliness is what is causing what is most often, unchecked, very rudimentary anti-Semitism. What they're saying is, because the world hates Jews, the world judges Israel unfairly, and that reflects poorly on us, which, as far as I understand it, is not the case.
I hope this isn't going too far afield, and I do want to get back to
No, no,
Iran,
no,
but
no, no, no. That's
I,
I think that's very much a part of the discussion.
th I was talking with someone. There was a big brouhaha a week ago about the Epstein files and the way Epstein used the word goyim,
Yeah,
right? And I wanted to say this, and you can think about my thought processes here. There were people saying, well, he used goyim in a pejorative way. See, this is what they think of us. And I'm like, what are you talking about? Like, I grew up in Squirrel Hill. Or not, I didn't grow up in Squirrel Hill in Pittsburgh, but I spent time in Squirrel Hill. It's a Jewish community. I knew Jewish kids and they would have uncles, right? And they would have one or two uncles that, were kind of chauvinistic. And they would
yeah,
use the term goyim in a pejorative way. Most people I knew didn't use it that way. It was, kind of ironic or
yeah.
joking. But I did know people that were chauvinistic. And it goes back to what you said. Um, the Jewish people are a normal people. I think there's chauvinists among every group. I've met Chinese that use the term layaway.
Yeah,
I
sure.
think that's the term in a pejorative way. Not all of them do. But what I don't get about this is, in a weird way, both anti Semites and some of the anti Semites both view Jews as exceptional. And I don't think Jews are exceptional. I think they're like anyone else. I think you'll find chauvinists among them. I also don't think every Jew should be lumped as a chauvinist or an exceptionalist. It's like really bizarre.
No, I think you're absolutely right. I think it's a quagmire, and it's a real challenge, as you say, to thread that the needle. I mean, I've received countless replies to my tweets and posts that say things like, "But you're not one of them, Ori, and you shouldn't worry. You're one of the good Jews, and we'll take care of you. When Israel is disbanded." Now, these people mean well. The fact that what they're saying is anti-Semitic is something else entirely. And you're right, supremacy is a loaded word, but this is a loaded debate. It's not a complex debate that's being waged by academics. I think of it as somewhat akin to the whole Me Too revolution. Okay, we have to be able to say what Israel is doing to the notion of Judaism, and I wholly agree. I'm talking about Jewish supremacy, not a kind of an age-old or an eternal conviction that everybody who's not Jewish is inferior. I'm talking about Jewish supremacy, for example, or perhaps the most prominent example, is as it is guaranteed by Israeli law or as it is manifested by Israel's behavior over the past several years. I can't believe I'm saying several years, where it appears to act under a very firm conviction that making sure Jews in Israel are safe, although that is, of course, thoroughly politicized, but let's say it isn't, that gives Israel the right to simply, toss international law into the trash heap onto the trash heap of history. Okay? That's the kind of supremacy that I'm talking about. I'm not talking about an
You're not
innate
even talking
sense.
necessarily about like Itamar Ben-Gvir type chauvinism.
No, 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 no,
Okay.
no, 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 no. I'm talking about the very legal institutional structure of the Israeli state. It's not for nothing that Israel has been accused of, and I think, as far as I know, been found guilty of the international crime of apartheid. That's not the South African model necessarily, but having segregation and racially based discrimination built into the legal system, the political system. That's what I mean. That's the kind of Jewish supremacy I'm talking about. Ben Gvir is easy. Ben Gvir is a populist. He's come to torch the place. That's how he thrives. Okay, that
Well,
he
that's
wants
sort
to.
of what I was referring to, right? I was saying, look, I'm not surprised that there's a Ben-Gvir because there's a Ben-Gvir in every ethnic
Ex-
community. There's a chauvinist like
exactly
that,
right.
you know. But you're
When
going
you
a
were
little bit deeper.
no, I just want to say that when you were talking about your friend's uncles in Squirrel Hill, I don't know if you're familiar with Bobby Moynihan's recurring character on Saturday Night Live, the drunk uncle, who
Right.
always gets a little drunk at holiday dinners and makes off-color remarks.
Right.
Yeah. So yeah, but no, I mean Israel is a heavily segregated country. The very basic, transparently justified policies of the Israeli state. So transparent that you don't even have to justify them because they're so obvious. Referring to a Palestinian politician as somebody who should be grateful for the favor that's being done to them by the Israeli parliament and allows them to, be a member, even though they support the Palestinian national cause, that's apartheid. That's seeing a Palestinian politician's role as necessarily joining the Zionist convoy and making sure that Israel remains a Jewish and democratic state. I mean, even just that, the Jewish and democratic state. You can't really have a democracy where adherents of one religion are legally, institutionally preferred over other religions. That's not that you can't do that. Israel is proof that you can't do that. That's the stuff I'm talking about. Exactly as you say. You have your Ben Gvils everywhere. You've got your Smotriches everywhere as well. I mean, he's a religious fanatic. And he is genuinely convinced, and his wife famously asked when she went into labor with one of their children, asked that her delivery not take place in a room where there were Palestinian women. And when asked for the reason, she said, "Well, they all come and bother the woman and they make a lot of noise. I don't want that." That's just pure, unadulterated racism and hate mongering. And exactly as you say, you get that everywhere. I'm talking about a multitude of Israelis who would really be surprised if you accuse them of racism. Because what do you mean? Palestinian Israelis can do whatever they want. And of course, they're not called Palestinian Israelis by most Israeli Jews.
They're Israeli Arabs, right?
That's right, which the Palestinian Israelis themselves really don't like because it's a domineering term. It emphasizes their Israeliness and it calls them Arab and it completely refutes the notion of a Palestinian identity that's connected to the land that has a collective memory, whatever. That's the kind of supremacy I'm talking about.
Now, in terms of Iran, it was interesting what you said. Do you see the attitude in Israel that, um, we've heard Trump say it, help is on the way. Like we're freeing the Iranian people. Meanwhile,
Yeah.
we're like, I think one of the first things we bombed was a school full of children,
Yeah.
which is horrifying to me. And I just wonder what do you make of this attitude, and have you seen it in Israel at all?
In Israel, once that girls' elementary school was bombed, immediately the cry went up that it was an Iranian missile that failed to launch and killed all of those girls. It wasn't us. We didn't do it, right? And why would you believe the enemy when they say we did it?
It's
Uh,
interesting. There's a lot of parallels to the way conspiracy theories
oh yeah.
happen in the U.S.
But in Israel, they're always one directional. It's always them against us in a very broad way. Americans are much more adept at tailor making specific conspiracies for specific constituencies. In Israel, it's always, whatever they do, that is by definition an untruth. Okay, they have to prove that it's true. Not we don't have to prove that it's true. And generally, and this goes back to what we were talking about earlier, Israelis have a blatant disregard. I 2.5 years ago, I might have said for any life that is not their own. Okay, so Palestinians, certainly their lives are effectively worthless, but Iranians as well. Who cares about the civilians? I mean, you get Israeli parliamentarians who visited. You know what? Maybe I have a better way of demonstrating it. This is now a discussion on Hebrew feeds. When Jews die in a war, the media, the popular media, reports that Jews were murdered. Okay, Iranians die, and of course they don't die because of Israeli fire. They were killed. By whom? We don't know. Whenever something happens, like the missile that struck a perfectly ordinary, stable bomb shelter in the town of Bet Shemesh near Jerusalem, and killed so far 9 people, probably more. Um, it's immediately referred to as the shelter disaster, and that's not just clickbait. It's a disaster because it's meant to tell you that when Jews die, it's an anomaly. It shouldn't happen. Right? They're murdered. It's a disaster. It wasn't meant to be. Jews are not supposed to die in Israel. Jews are supposed to live. That is the true raison d'être of the Israeli state. To save Jewish lives at all costs. Now, as far as I'm concerned, that's a manifestation of Jewish supremacy. Because it means that Israel gets to do whatever the hell it wants to anybody who's not Jewish. And it perceives as a threat, of course. But the more public discourse here is radicalized, the more the government is radicalized. Go figure who they'll consider a threat.
In terms of Iran itself, I mean, what's weird is I don't think either of us, necessarily have like some rosy view of the Islamic Republic.
By all
But
means.
that's beside the point.
Yeah.
And also, I'm not. I mean, I was thinking about the work of Robert Pape recently, a professor who's done work on terrorism and the logic of terrorism. He wrote a book called Bombing to Win, where he just points out, you know, these air campaigns don't usually lead to regime change. I think he even said there's not one example you can find.
No.
Um, th- I, I don't know what to tell people, but bombing usually does not lead to protesters on the street being able to overthrow their government. In fact, it can often lead to rallying around the flag. That's why I just feel like I'm being gaslit.
That's absolutely, and at an even simpler level than that, when you're bombing the hell out of a country, what normal person would go out into the street and try and carry out a popular revolution? At best, you could hope for a backroom coup d'état. But what sort of, who's going to take back the country? I mean, I heard Trump imploring Iranian security personnel to go out and take back their country. But why would a major in the IRGC trust Trump? I mean, why would any Iranian trust the United States at this point, other than supporters of the so-called Crown Prince Reza Pahlavi, who is an Israeli-American joint venture? They may be very happy that Khamenei is dead, but that really doesn't mean they think, certainly not Iranians, who are extremely sensitive to the notion of foreign meddling. There's no reason for them to think that anybody is acting in their best interests. And they're particularly sensitive to foreign meddling, by the way, because they were never directly colonized. They were not directly occupied, although both Britain and Russia interfered in Iranian affairs for at least 2 centuries. But they were never directly taken over, and they're very proud of that. So why would they simply do Trump's bidding? Or, listen to Netanyahu speak in Persian and say, okay, I'm persuaded. I'll go into the streets that are being bombed as we speak, and I'll take the governor's mansion. It's just not going to happen.
So I wanted to ask you in that regard, what do you make of how Iran has responded to this time? I mean, because in general, I think Iran has actually been pretty restrained in terms of how it's dealt with the US and Israel. I mean, yeah, what it's done domestically to its own population is horrifying to me, but in terms of its dealings with the US and Israel, I don't really buy into the Mad Mullahs narrative.
I very much concur. I think at the very least, we can say that Iran had fully and extensively planned for this contingency. Okay, the Iranians have a game plan. And it looks like their game plan is not to inflict heavy, massive damage quickly, but to be a thorn in the entire Middle East side for long enough to pressure the Gulf monarchies into pressuring Trump to end the campaign. And they've built plans for keeping the institutions of the Islamic Republic alive. And this is actually happening. Weirdly enough, as Iran is being bombed to bits, the Islamic Republic is undergoing a constitutional process for the selection of a new supreme leader, a process that has never taken place. Khamenei was appointed directly by Khomeini. He's only the second supreme leader. So the whole notion of a selection by a special council being convened to select the leader and so on, that's a lengthy, intense constitutional process, and the Islamic Republic is strong enough to carry it out as we speak. And I think the Iranians have a game plan here. I think they don't trust the Americans. I think they think that if they were to just accept American demands at the moment, there's a great possibility that an American-Israeli alliance would simply attack them in a year's time again, whenever it was convenient for
In
both
other
Trump.
words, they view this as existential.
Yeah, well, they feel they have to take a stand.
Right.
Right? They need to put their foot down. And they need to make Trump understand. And in that sense, by the way, they're also very smart. They understand that Netanyahu may talk the talk, but that he needs Trump's authorization to carry out a forever war. And Trump's not giving it. So they need to make Trump understand that for a whole host of reasons, he has to stop this, that this cannot be another Iraq.
Yeah,
And
and
in that,
really, I mean, I'm
yeah,
not saying it's going to be a cakewalk for Iran, but Iran is in a position where all it has to actually do, the Islamic Republic, all they have to do is survive.
yeah, absolutely. By the way, very similar to the dynamic that existed, still exists between Israel and Hezbollah in Lebanon. That's all Hezbollah has to do to succeed, is to survive, to win. I'll go one step further, to win. And you're absolutely right. Iran is being pounded, and will continue to be pounded for long days. Who knows? Maybe 2 weeks. I'm thinking. But the Islamic Republic entered this fray with open eyes. And in very stark contrast to Israel and also to the United States, they made very realistic plans based on the assumption that they will be pounded, they will be attacked and bombed. And like you say, they're all they need to do is stay alive, and they seem to be doing a quite an admirable job of doing exactly that. So yeah, I don't think the smart money is on Israel here. particularly because, again, just like in Gaza, Israel has no real definition of victory. What does regime change mean? Yeah, Israel's best bet is Reza Pahlavi, and no way are the Iranians going to let him be installed as Shah,
I
even
was
if he
gonna
fell.
say, it's funny. I've talked to people about this, and people say, "Oh, well, I know some diaspora Persians in California that are pro
Of course,
Pahlavi," and I'm like, that does not. First off, that does not translate necessarily to people inside Iran.
it really
And
doesn't.
second off, I'm not even sure the Iranian diaspora is in full agreement on that. I think there's a lot of media sort of creating that impression, but I don't even see it with the diaspora. So
I agree, and I'm not going to say he is as reviled as the Mujahideen Khalq, the
MEK,
the MEK, the group who fought with Saddam Hussein in the Iran-Iraq War. But he is not well liked, and his people were very obnoxious during the protests that turned into the January massacre. They demanded full control of the process. They attacked people who did not shout "Long live the Shah," Javed Shah. In demonstrations, they claimed that those people were not loyal to Iran, that the only identity open to freedom-seeking Iranians was a monarchist one, at least for the time being. He wasn't well liked before, and he's less liked now. So there doesn't seem to be any mass or even, particularly viable popular support for his installment as ruler. And if that's the case, I mean, Israel bet, as is usual for Netanyahu, he bet everything he could on one thing only, and he lost. And he's going to pay the most expensive price for the loss at the worst time. But what he's won, as far as he's concerned, is this um, this notion that a lot of Israelis are very much buying into, which is that he has secured Israel's right to respond at will at any scale it wants, for any duration it wants. Uh,
well,
so, yeah,
what has he lost though? You said
I think he's lost any chance at, I mean, all of his stated goals. I think he's failed miserably in all of them. That includes Gaza, and it includes Iran, and it includes Lebanon and Syria. I mean, Syria, obviously, the Ashara administration in Syria is getting a very broad mandate from the international community and appears to be doing well, despite Israeli protestations to the contrary and rushing in to save the Druze and whatever, whatever. Um, but I think he's also in the process of losing Gaza because Gaza is being rapidly internationalized and Hamas is very far from being destroyed. Hamas is the organizing element that's being funded by Turkey and Qatar in Gaza. They're transferring funds, and Hamas is rebuilding not just military capabilities, but civilian capabilities.
so much for that board of peace.
Yeah, exactly. And while Israel claims that if it has to, it'll go door to door and destroy Hamas, Israel's already destroyed Gaza. Gaza's going to have to be completely rebuilt. But that doesn't mean that Israel destroyed Hamas. And of course, the other goal was the return of the hostages. And it is becoming very clear, even though the official Israel will never admit it, but it's becoming very clear that quite a few hostages were killed in the massive carpet bombings that followed October 7th, 2023, immediately. And that the duration of the quote unquote war, other Israelis were also killed by Israeli bombings and died of malnutrition or poor health, due in large part to Israel refusing to let aid enter Gaza. This whole notion that Hamas stole all the food and all of the Hamas fat cats were feasting while ordinary Gazans and the Israeli prisoners were languishing, that doesn't seem to be true.
Uh,
Yes, certainly there was a corrupt leadership that was living outside and enjoying vast funds, but people who lived in Gaza starved together.
well, this ties into I know in Israel there's sort of a tendency to say it's all the Qataris. You know, the Qataris are infiltrating even our politics here in Israel. We've talked about that before, and it's interesting because in the past few days, there was a report in the Washington Post saying these sources are telling us that it was the Saudis pushing Trump to go to war with Iran. And then Rachel Maddow from MS Now, formerly MSNBC, is saying this is the Gulf states. Who benefits? The Gulf states, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, the UAE. And I'm just thinking to myself, I'm not buying it. I'm not buying that the Gulf states, the Gulf monarchies, which I've been critical of, I don't think they want this. How do they benefit from this? I'm
You know,
wondering what your thoughts are.
once again, I agree with you. I think what the Gulf states want more than anything is stability. That's what the Gulf states want. And nothing about this war spells stability in any way. So I don't think that's what the Gulf states want at all, including Saudi Arabia. Granted, there is a kind of a rivalry between a kind of a Cold War even between the United Arab Emirates and the Saudis over, the agenda for the future of the Middle East. The Saudis,
Well,
uh,
especially in what Sudan in North Africa. Yeah.
yeah, but not even specifically more of a kind of a regional vision. The Saudis want quick fixes. They want to make sure everything's stable right now. The Emiratis really are playing a long game, and they are um, placing their people and their connections in conjectures and contexts that will prove effective a decade from now. So that's part of the tension between them. So there is tension there, but I agree with you. I don't think they profit from this at all. And if you want to talk about the Washington Post, I believe that nearly the entire Middle East staff of the Washington Post was fired by Jeff Bezos. And I don't think it's accidental that that's the sort of coverage that you're seeing now. Okay. And that's why you're seeing it in the Post and not in other reputable American newspapers. So I agree. I think the Gulf, I understand even the Israeli media has now um, pushed headlines that say that Qatar is now pressing Trump to end the war quickly. Even though the Qataris were also announced today that they shot down two Iranian fighter planes, who apparently were not en route to attack Qatar, but were probably patrolling over the disputed islands or gas field between Qatar and Iran, and maybe went a few miles too far into Qatari territory. But in any case, yes, I don't think it's the Gulf states. I think everybody except for Israel does not want a long war, and most people did not want a war to begin with. And I think that there was a genuine sense that the Iranians and the Americans were heading towards a deal. Israel is trying to parlay this as a brilliant display of misdirection. I don't think that's the case. I think there were honest negotiations, and I think Trump, being Trump, made a very reckless decision based on seemingly splendiferous tactical intelligence. And I think he realizes that it backfired.
Why do you think he realized that? Just because of the Hegseth speech, or
I think, well, he has been talking repeatedly about, the Iranians wanted to talk and I agreed. And he's been talking about the new leadership in Iran, and he has been setting goals again that do not include regime change, even though he seemingly said that he was for regime change in his speech from Mar-a-Lago. He hasn't returned to that, and then he sent his minion Hegseth to say very clearly that this is not about regime change. So it's not. He didn't just say it's not about regime change. He said this isn't about regime change, so it's not going to be a long war. That's an entire conceptual framework there.
Now,
Yeah.
are you trusting that it's not going to be a long war?
Yeah, I think it's not going to be a long war. I think Trump is trying to pull every card he has up his sleeve, and I think he has quite a few of them, to distract attention from his, you know, repeated failures for the GOP, and expected failures in the midterms. And I think he realizes that, in many ways his time is up, and I do think he's interested in leaving a legacy, because you remember that, he solved 8 wars, including the notorious one between Albania and Azerbaijan. But for all of those reasons, I don't think Trump feels like he has a whole lot of time, and he's got real trouble on his hands at home. Netanyahu wants this war to go on forever,
Do
because
you
any
think this
kind.
could lead to a definitive break at some point between Netanyahu and Trump?
I don't think it'll be blunt or pejorative. I actually think Trump will try to kill Netanyahu off with a golden handshake. I think that's the reason he has been harping on his disappointment with Israel's president, Isaac Herzog, who has not pardoned Netanyahu yet. I think
I
that's
was going to say, I know I've had listeners question you when it comes to Trump being fed up with the Israelis, but I think you read between the lines a bit more than they do, maybe.
I, I'm not even sure Trump is fed up with Israelis.
Okay.
I don't think Trump
Or
is
fed up with Netanyahu, maybe.
he's fed up with Netanyahu. I don't think
Yeah, and
Trump
yeah.
care. I don't think Trump cares about Israel. And in that sense, and Trump is not obliged to cater to evangelical whims, for example. So Trump will send a Mike Huckabee to be the American ambassador here, and he's okay with Huckabee talking about the borders of Israel being the borders of the promised land in Genesis 15. Why? Because he doesn't care. He doesn't owe his victory to the evangelicals anymore, so Huckabee can spout off at the mouth as long and as ridiculously as he wishes.
But what
And
gives you the impression that he has an issue with Netanyahu? Because I know a lot of people say no, he doesn't have an issue with Netanyahu. They're working together.
well, first of all, Netanyahu still cannot refrain from presenting his work with Trump as a kind of a manipulation. And I think if there's something Trump remembers well, if there's a grievance that he feeds and stokes, it's against people who claim to be working him. And you remember we've talked about this, that infamous cartoon in the New York Times, I think it was, that showed Netanyahu walking Trump on a leash. I have no doubt Trump has not forgotten that cartoon. And Netanyahu has a grandiosity about him that does not appeal to Trump. Trump likes to think of himself as folksy and also as intuitive. And Netanyahu, certainly over the last 2.5 years, reeks with effort. If you want the perfect contrast, look at the budding love affair or unilateral love affair between Trump and Mamdani. Okay? Mamdani is the opposite of Netanyahu, not opinion wise, demeanor wise. Mamdani's
You mean
cool.
from when they met? Yeah.
Yeah, Mamdani's cool. Mamdani confers some of his coolness on Trump. And Mamdani is also practical. You saw the whole fake New York Post headline. The whole Ford tells city drop dead, Trump tells city let's build. Mamdani had his team make a mock-up New York Post front page. There was a genuine one that showed from Gerald Ford's time in office, when the headline was Ford to city drop dead, and he had a mock-up made of a picture of Trump in the Oval Office, and the headline was Trump to city, let's build. And Trump asked him in their first meeting to bring him large-scale building plans, and he did. Okay, Trump likes the notion that people want to cooperate with him, and I think he detests the notion that people think they're manipulating him. And I have no doubt he thinks Netanyahu is manipulating him, because that's the way Netanyahu talks. And also, Trump has a long memory. It's true that Netanyahu pulled this off for Obama, but Perhaps you recall Netanyahu's speech to a joint session of Congress back in the day when John Boehner was Speaker, where he was invited by Boehner and not by Obama. And he spoke out against democratic policy and made Israel a partisan issue. Trump doesn't trust that. He doesn't see Netanyahu as a deal maker. He sees him as too beholden to his Israeli stakeholders. And he also sees them as kind of malevolent, but perhaps more than anything, I think he sees him as kind of a loser because he knows Netanyahu would not have gotten where he's gotten unless had he not had a mind-bending amount of American help. Because while Trump doesn't care, I really do think Joe Biden was an ardent Zionist, very much pro-Israel, and all the stuff that's coming out of the veterans of his administration about how they were forced to hold back and not reveal how American policy is in violation of American law and all that. That would not happen in a Trump White House, regardless of Stephen Miller. So I don't think Trump likes Netanyahu. I don't think he wants to appear to be in direct conflict with Netanyahu. I think he wants Netanyahu to go away. Hence the repeated requests and somewhat instructions for Herzog to grant him a pardon.
If the U.S. does make its way out of this, if Trump somehow finds a way to declare victory and say, "Oh, we negotiated some," whatever, what does that mean for Israel? Like, if this isn't drawn out, what does it mean? That's what I'm asking you.
It's really bad for Israel as it has now situated itself, because this consensus that we talked about before regarding Palestinian lives is also a consensus about the jackpot. Israelis don't want to fight for values. They want to fight for impunity and for full discretion and freedom of action. And if Trump walks away, then it will suddenly, this will be very good for Trump, because I really do feel like the majority of the world wants to walk away from Israel. And if Trump signals that he has cooled significantly on Israel, you will see people in official executive positions making decisions that are much more radical than they are now regarding the relationships of their countries with Israel. I mean, even now, when you listen to really a shameful excuse for a leader like Keir Starmer talk about whether the United Kingdom is going to come into the war, he's saying they attacked our base on Diego Garcia. He's not saying we stand with Israel. And even Merz, the German chancellor, who is far and away the most excessive pro-Israel advocate I've ever seen in terms of Western leaders, he's also saying the world is changing. We need to know who our friends are. We need to know who our enemies are. And we also need to understand that this is the age of the powerful. They take back what they want. By the way, as we're speaking, because I'm on my phone, I'm getting a push notice from Israeli media with a statement from the commander of the IRGC, who is officially informing the world that the Straits of Hormuz have shut down and that the Iranian Navy stands ready to fire on any ship that tries to pass through them. So that's another piece of leverage that the Iranians have, and it's
Yeah, because this
interesting.
is going to affect the global energy market. I mean, that's an understatement on my part, but
It's going to affect not just the energy market first and foremost, but maritime traffic. Stuff that needs to come in from China for people who ordered it on Temu. That's not going to happen. Yeah, that's a big deal. I understand that Trump has said something about using the American National Energy Reserve to ensure that the price of gas won't go up radically. He can do that for a limited period of time. I'm not sure he wants to do that. He doesn't want to appear as though he's at his wit's end. And watch the gradual unfolding of the Iranian plan coming into place. Right? They didn't get into this raring to go. They are very level-headed. and they are using their cards when they think it's the right time. And I think that they're doing this now. I would, again, this is speculation on my part, but it seems to me like they're trying to drive another wedge between Trump and Israel.
Can you
Yeah, because
explain? What do you mean?
this will pressure Trump more than it will pressure Israel. The price of gas is a much more sensitive political subject in the United States than it is here. Right? So, and I think the Iranians understand that. So, if gas prices spike in the U.S., then people are going to be much more irate than they would be about the human rights of the Iranian people.
So, what I feel like you're saying is that right now the Iranian strategy is to increase the stakes, not just for the US, but also probably even the Gulf states, increase the stakes for everyone.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's the Iranian long game. Well, not long, but in terms of weeks, maybe. The Iranians want to annoy everybody to the degree where they push Trump to stop this. If Trump stopped this, then it's very clear that he's stopping Israel in its tracks. And if he's stopping Israel in its tracks, then that says that Israel's power in the region would be almost instantaneously diminished in a very real way, and that's a big deal.
Before closing out, I know you mentioned Keir Starmer. What did you make of his the way he sort of played this, where it's like, yes, Trump has basically done an illegal war with Israel, but also, we have to fight back against the Iranians.
I think he's ridiculous, and that is without me starting about my crush on Zach Polanski and the Greens. I think Starmer is ridiculous, and I think he has been profoundly damaged by the disgrace that his colleagues and confidants have experienced over the Epstein files. And also, I think that this entire stance when Tony Blair and Bill Clinton presented this third way, this centrist left, and it seemed like such a revelation. I think it's coming apart at the seams. When you're faced with a Stephen Miller and his influence over Trump, or a Tucker Carlson and his influence over Trump, you're not going to combat that with sensible neoliberal economic policies. Okay, so the world is being radicalized politically, and people like Starmer are an obsolete relic in many ways.
It's interesting to me that I see a lot of people here talking about how, and I promise this will be the last thing we cover because I've kept you long,
Love it.
but I've seen a little bit of triumphalism from a few people lately, people I live around and whatnot, saying, wow, isn't it amazing what the US can do? Look what we did in Venezuela. We killed the Ayatollah. But most people I'm meeting are saying, what's the point of this? And it's not, people will say, well, what about the protesters that the Islamic Republic killed? What about this? What about, and I think most people are saying, well, we can't save the world, and we should only really fight wars when we have to. Wars are meant to be fought defensively. This is a war of choice, though, and most people I know seem very against this because it's a war of choice. It's not a war of. It's not an existential war for the U.S. It didn't
All
need to
right.
happen.
It's true, and it's true for Israel as well. And I'll share a personal anecdote with you. My ex-wife was a physician, and she found medical TV shows intolerable because she could spot the cracks. She could look at an emergency room and say, "That's not how they do that. That's not how they do that." And the magic, there was no suspension of disbelief. I think that when it comes to Trump, there's been real suspension of disbelief for a lot of very faithful people. And I think they're starting to see the cracks. And going off on this war of choice without getting congressional approval, knowing that it's an unpopular measure, they understand that this is not some charismatic messiah, but rather that this is a, a completely egotistic, an ego-driven man who does whatever the hell he wants and cares nothing for what his constituency thinks. And more than anything, before you start talking about the morality of it or the ethics of it, it's a crack. It's no longer smooth. And Netanyahu has been cracking for some time now. Remember that when
Well,
people hear,
you're talking, by the way, about I think the sort of MAGA cracks and fissures. But even like I know liberals that are very critical of the Islamic Republic, and even they'll say to me,
yeah,
this is a war of choice and we shouldn't be fighting it. Even if we don't like the Islamic Republic and what they do to their domestic population, it doesn't it's a war of choice, so we should be fighting it.
absolutely,
So it's I
absolutely,
see it on both sides of the political spectrum.
you're absolutely right.
And the
And
emotional blackmail that is played a lot of times isn't working, at least as far as I can tell.
I think a lot of these people that you're talking about who are critical of the Islamic Republic and who are also critical of Trump got to a stage at some point when they were realistically willing to concede that maybe there was something that they were missing. Maybe there was some sort of appeal or some kind of American, um, I don't know, glamour that Trump represented, populist and dumb and maybe demented, but that it was there, that it was real, and that they had to come to terms with it. They couldn't just wish it away or bury themselves in their ivory tower until the storm dies down. But I think now they understand that Trump is a bully and a liar and somebody who really does treat the country as his own estate. And I think that offends Americans on all sides of the political map. The notion, I think Americans are very, and I for one, very much appreciate this about political discourse in the United States, even when the depths it plummets are tremendous. I think Americans really do have a perception of the United States as an idea. Okay, and that is a shared conviction by Americans of all political opinions. And what they're seeing is somebody who disrespects that. What they're seeing is somebody who would stop at nothing for his own, for securing his own personal gain and his own personal future. Now, in Israel, it is a little different because a lot of Israelis agree that Netanyahu is corrupt and ego driven and all that, but they also think there's nobody who can replace him. And what they're against is his personal demeanor. Israelis don't feel like they should say anything. That goes back to the beginning of our conversation, that remark from Shaul Magid about how every Zionist has a little bit of a Kahanist in him. Israelis don't object to the genocide. They don't. They, they, they don't necessarily support it with um, celebratory remarks. Not all of them, not most of them even, but they don't object to it. And that's the main difference. I don't think Americans, I mean, I'm looking at Marjorie Taylor Greene, right? And the stuff that's coming out of her. I've never heard her being so straight up. I don't think she's just angry at Trump for dumping her. I think that for all her faults, and her many, many faults, and craziness and wackiness, I think she really is personally offended at what's happening. And that's why I think you hear it from a lot of Americans. But Israelis are not offended at what's happening. They support it.
Is there anything else you want to say in closing, and what do you hope my listeners get out of this specific conversation?
Um, I hope your listeners understand, or better, how this was not a war of choice. I'm sorry, how this was a war of choice, as you say, and not inevitable or necessary or preventive in any way. And and also our discussion about what it means to be Israeli and what it means to be Jewish and the future of Israel-American relations. I think that is something that's worth talking about in even greater detail. I think that's a point that's not usually discussed, certainly not when the cannons are roaring. But I think that might be the most major thing to come out of this war. a real wedge driven between Israel and the United States. And if 2028 sees a Democrat coming into the White House, that Democrat will not remove the wedge. He will drive it even deeper. He will feel enabled. I mean, if Gavin Newsom is objecting to any kind of APAC money, for example, that's a big deal. And
Well,
it's only
it's
going to get.
interesting because I know a lot of my listeners have criticisms of the Democrats from a sort of left-wing perspective,
Yeah,
but I've also said to people, the Democrats aren't a dumb party,
they
and
are.
they go where the wind is blowing.
It's true.
And with young people, like people below the age of, 55, below 40, the wind is blowing in a different direction, as we're seeing from polls. I mean, there's more sympathy for Palestinians in the latest poll than
Yeah,
Israel.
that's groundbreaking, by the way, and was observed for about 5 hours in the Israeli news cycle and then completely forgot. But that's insane. Not insane. I'm sorry. That's extremely sane. It's just unprecedented. So yeah, I agree with you completely. I don't think the Democrats are. I think the stalwarts of the Democratic Party are going to be surprised in the primaries leading up to the 2028 presidential. And I also think that even if the Democrat who ultimately assumes the office, should they do so, he will find that he's up against a public uh, discourse and a public set of pressures and dynamics and forces that is very different from what Trump is facing even now. Things are changing, and they're changing rapidly, and they're changing because Israel continues to insist that it is within its rights to do everything that it's doing. And that is just not sustainable, which is also why I don't think this is going to be a long war.
I
I
have an
don't,
Mhm.
yeah,
Go.
go ahead.
Well, I was going to say I have a number of listeners, American Jewish listeners, that range from Zionists, which I don't know, I'm surprised there are Zionists that listen to my show, to anti-Zionist American Jews. I sort of am just an analyst. I would say I'm a non-Zionist. What do you want to say to my American Jewish listenership, regardless of where they land on the Zionist spectrum?
I want to say that Israel is stuck in the deepest rut it has ever been stuck in during its existence. Israel is um, looped into a vicious circle of its own creation, and I don't think that Israel will be capable of letting itself out of this circle if American Jews, and I'm emphasizing American Jews here because I think it's the most vibrant and profound cultural and religious community in the world, in the Jewish world. If American Jews don't make a concentrated effort to define their Judaism, not in contrast to Israel, but to define their Judaism in a way that provides Jews with a different path. Again, not Reform Judaism, but a Judaism that takes a political stand, that has a clear notion of right and wrong, that is not connected to a particular political setting, like whatever Israeli policy is. I think American Jews really, it's their challenge. I don't see anybody in Israel who's capable of doing that here. And I think, and I don't have a right to say this, but as an Israeli Jew, I feel like I need American Jewry to help me, stay Jewish and stay Israeli. Because I'm never going to abandon either, but I kind of want to. So that's what I would say to them. I look to them for constructive and courageous dialogue. And I think it's time to consider every option and put everything on the table and be as frank as possible about everything from generational divides to political ethics right now. And I'm not accusing them of anything. I feel their pain. I understand their fear. I hope it stirs them up. I hope it pushes them into action rather than into simply accepting whatever it is Israel is doing.
I want to thank you again, Ori Goldberg, for coming on Parallax Views.
It's always my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
A special thanks to my $10 and above tier supporters on Patreon, who make this show possible with their generous donations. Producers' credits shout out to those supporters: Aaron, Jeremy, Matt, Big Bob's Beepers, James, Enoch, David, Sadad, Tristan, Bob, Eva, Miriam, West Bank Robbery Pod, B. Lund, Transnatural Perspectives Podcast, Dan, Nick, Elliot, Fabian, Tom, Arlen, Bo, Spartacus, James, G, Jamie, Will, JC, WV, Sutra, Orc, Catherine, Darko, Nathan, Holland, Dan, Mark, Chase, Olm, Gary, Emilia, Nick, Brace, Michael, and Brian. Please join those listeners in supporting me at the $10 and above tier of my Patreon page, patreon.com/Parallax Views, if you'd like your very own producer's credit on each and every edition of the program. Until next time, you've been listening to Parallax Views with Parallax Views to Parallax Views with Parallax Views.
The way out is not simply to say, don't do it, just to prohibit. It's nothing else. If we don't do it, others will be doing it like crazy. So, we have to confront the problem. But no, basically, I know of the great anxieties, problems, new forms of control, but it's also new forms of freedom. This is why I always emphasize that internet and all this new digital stuff, it's a very ambiguous phenomenon, but it's the field of struggle. New forms of enslavement, but at the same time, new incredible forms of freedom. We have to accept the fight with no nostalgia for old, allegedly more authentic communities or whatever. I'm not afraid. I'm not afraid. I'm not afraid. I'm not afraid.